Welcome to CSSBattle Acid Rain, which is target number 5 for Battle 1 of CSS Battle challenges that we're tackling as part of this video series. In this very short video, and hopefully it's a short one, I'm going to try to replicate this design here using, of course, HTML and CSS only. So again, we have the code editor sitting on the left panel here. As I sort of code, this panel will change depending on how I code things, and my goal is to basically turn this into reality. That's what my job is as part of this challenge. So before I dive in, I just want to quickly maybe go over how we may want to tackle this or break this down a bit. So generally, as we can see, there's this outer panel here, which is basically like your body or a container div that is holding everything else. This has a specific background color, and inside that we have basically 3 separate elements. We have a circle going on here, and we have a leaf-like, I guess it's like a raindrop sort of thing. So we have one in the center there and one on the left here, and they're sort of overlapping on top of each other. So one thing that we could probably do is we could try to make maybe build this out first, the middle one, because for one thing we know that this is sort of vertically centered, at least it seems like it, and horizontally centered. And then we can build something similar. Well, I guess this one would be exactly the same shape as this one, but might need to be moved around a bit with maybe margin or maybe some sort of transform happening. And of course, same thing for this one, but this is just a circle, right? So that should be pretty easy as well. So let's go ahead and start doing that. We'll start with the container, and then we'll tackle how to build out the center portion, the center raindrop here. Then maybe we can do the circle and then come back to the left raindrop here. All right, let's get started. So again, this is my HTML block. This is my HTML, this style CSS. Basically, all the CSS will live in here. Let me just quickly clean this up, as I don't need those comments. So the first thing I'll do is build this container out, which is basically the whole body, but I'll just call this a div with a class of container. Great. Inside the container, we'll basically have this middle raindrop here. But before I do that, let's go ahead and style this container real quick. So we know this container will have a width of 100 view width and a height of 100 view height. And this one will have a background of this color here. Awesome. So far so good, but I think there's some browser default styles that are being sort of applied here. That's why we have some gap here. So what I tend to do for all these challenges is target these by star here, and I'll add a padding of 0, 0, margin of 0, and I also like to add, and box sizing of border box. There we go. That problem is fixed, and we have the container. Great. Now let's go ahead and build out this part here. This part is going to contain this leaf here, or not really leaf, like an acid rain, like a raindrop. So we'll call this like a raindrop, I guess, for now, but it's sort of the one that's in the middle. So I'm going to give this a div first of all, create a new div element, and give it a class of raindrop, and we'll maybe give it a separate class, say middle, right? So middle right there. Okay, so the middle one is basically just to kind of identify or differentiate these 3 drops or these 3 elements. I could just do this too. That would also work. Actually, let's do that for now. So we know this is the middle one. So we're going to go ahead and target that by class. And we need to make sure that this is vertically and horizontally centered. And of course, there's multiple different ways of doing that. The simplest thing that really comes to my mind is display flex. But in this video, I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. One thing we could do is basically make sure that this is sort of relative to the container, the entire container here. So what we're going to do is, we're going to target the container here, and we're going to give it a display, we're going to give it a position relative to say that there's going to be other elements that should be positioned based on this container, which of course is our raindrop middle element. So for the raindrop middle, I'm going to give it a position of absolute. And let's make sure to give it some like width and height so we can actually see the element in the first place. Give it a width of 100, height of 100. Give it a background of, let's say, this color here. And there it is. So it's sitting up top. So how do we make sure that this is actually centered? So one thing we could do is we can basically use top and left properties to move this down a bit, 50%, and then use translate, I guess use some sort of a transform to make sure it moves based on this, like this, based on sort of like center position of this element. So it's right now it's basically moves the element from the top. So what it would look like is, let me show you exactly what it looks like right now. So if I do top, basically move this 50% of the way to the container, right? Basically 50% of the container. This is what it's going to look like. Because, so again, this is not vertically centered because this part, the top part here is vertically centered, but we want this to be centered based on like the center of this element. So one thing we could do is, let me also move this, actually what we could use this transform, and we can say translate y, translate y is going to be negative 50%. So that solves our problems. Now it is vertically centered. Now how do we do that horizontally? Same idea. We need to move this to the left 50%. But we also need to change, basically make sure that the element moves from the center, basically. So to do that, instead of doing this translate y and x separately, I'm going to combine these two into just one translate property. Make sure this is negative 50% for the x-axis and negative 50% for the y-axis, and there we have it. It's vertically and horizontally centered. Great. Now, how do we make it look like a raindrop? That is the challenge, right? So one thing we can see is that we have the top right part already matching in a sense, but it seems like the sides are sort of rounded, and whenever the sides are rounded, generally that means that maybe there is some sort of a border radius that was applied. So maybe the left side has a border radius. The top, the bottom left has a border radius, and the bottom right has a border radius. Let's try making that. So I'm going to give this a border top left radius of 50%. Rather, I'm going to give it the same as the width, because I think sometimes, again, this is generally if it's a circular element, it should just work. But I like to give it an exact same as the width. So it sort of takes up exactly, so it basically curves it nice and smoothly. So hopefully this time it works. So border top left is fine. Let's do the border bottom left of 100 pixel. And oh look, that's how you make a sort of like a semicircular element. Anyway, next thing we're going to do is border top right radius. And seems like we have it, but the direction seems a little weird. how do we make that? So it looks like maybe the raindrop, the width and the height could be a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna make that change first. Make sure this is like 120 maybe, and we may want to change these to 120 as well to match. Um, but yeah, there we go. There we go. I think it looks good. But it looks like this needs to be rotated a bit. Maybe like this part needs to be rotated up a bit. So one thing we could do is we can use that translate property which I already done, and maybe we could use the rotate property here and rotate it maybe negative 90 degrees. Would that work? Maybe not, because we're moving moving this element itself. So maybe if we don't want to do it that way, one thing we could do is we can just play around with the border items to make sure that we basically we don't add a border radius to the right side. So maybe it seems like maybe we want to add the same thing. So let's go ahead and add the border radius to the top right side as well. Now it's going to look like a circle basically. Top right. That looks right. Why isn't this working? Top right radius. Ah, that's kind of weird. Is it saving it? That's kind of weird. Okay. What am I missing? Top left radius. Top right. Bottom left. Oh, of course. Bottom. That's why it wasn't working. So maybe that's why it wasn't working. If I get rid of this, oops, I don't know what's going on right now. Anyway, there we go. Okay, so I think what was happening is I forgot to change the property of on the right on the left side here. Sorry, on the very last property here. This was bottom top twice. Anyway, there we go. Now it looks like a leaf, and it looks like, look, everything is matching exactly by pixel. So if you click on the diff here, you will see that we basically have the middle one covered. Great. Now all you have to do is replicate the same behavior and just move the elements a bit for this element on the left and the center one. Let's go ahead and make this the circular one first. So I'm going to go ahead and create another div here, because again, I want to make sure it has the same behavior as this, but the only difference is it just shifted up and to the left. Excuse me, shifted up and to the right a bit. Shifted up and to the right a bit. Great. Let's go ahead and copy this whole div here, and I'm going to say this is not a raindrop, rather it's a circle, and I'm going to say circle right, just to indicate where that is. There's only one circle, but let's just call it circle right. Great. I'm going to go ahead and target that CSS, and I'm going to just copy the whole thing, because I think generally it should look the same except for these border properties. Right now it looks like there's no difference, because basically it's two elements that are sitting right on, it's overlapped on top of each other, so you don't really see it. But if we get rid of this border, you will see it's going to look like a circle, or rather a square, which is fine. What we want to do is add a border radius of 50%, so it's a circle, which should have worked. I don't know why it did not work. Top right translate, everything's looking good. Let's give it a different background color. So for temporarily, let's go ahead and give it a background of green. Oh, there we go. Oh, interesting. You just couldn't see it because it's okay. So everything is good. All you have to do is make sure that we sort of tamper with this transform property so it's shifted up a bit and to the right. So one thing we could do is basically now it is moved to the center. One thing we could do is we can play around with the x-axis to make sure it is moved to the right a little bit first, and then we can move up top. So what we want to do is we want to say that I want you to move to the left 50%, which is great, but I also want you to maybe move over just a little bit more. So I'm going to add a calc here, and I'm going to maybe add another 50 pixels. So as you can see, when I add that 50 pixels, it moves the element to the right a bit. But I don't, it's kind of hard to tell if it is, it doesn't look, see, like the circle ends here, but there's a little bit more. So maybe this is 55. No, not quite, not quite. Maybe it is 56. See, there's some playing around here going on. Sometimes you have to do that. Um, we'll do the same thing for the top for the y-axis. So we'll go ahead and copy this part, move it here. Um, instead of using plus here, I'm going to use minus, so it moves up a bit. And looks like we almost have it. This is when the diff checker really comes in handy. So check this out. We turn this on, you can really see what the different shapes look like now. So I can kind of play around with this number a bit. So it looks like maybe it could be moved up a bit. And let's make sure this is 57. Not quite. What about just 60? Maybe 60 will just work. 60. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Perfect. Great. Looks good. Now here's the easy. Here's the good part here. We just did the same thing for the circle. I'm going to assume it's going to be the same spacing for this item, but reverse basically. So let's go ahead and create that div for this leaf on the left here. I'm going to copy with the top element here, paste it in, make sure this is the left one. Oops. So it's a raindrop left. I'm going to copy this, paste it right in there. I'm going to copy over all the CSS because again, it's the same shape but probably just different background and so on. So go ahead and copy over all the CSS from the raindrop middle and paste it right in there. But all we're going to do is just again tamper with the transform property a bit to make sure that it matches exactly what we want it to look like. Go ahead and paste in this from the circle, but again this is going to the top right, one just to be moved to the bottom left. So we're going to come back here and basically reverse this whole thing. So I want this to be moved to the left a bit horizontally. So I'm going to move this plus into a minus, and I want this to be moved, shifted down a bit vertically. So I'm going to add a plus here. Look at that. I think we got it all covered except for this background color that's going on here. Which is, let's change the background color of this, the circle here, to this color here. So let's add a background of this. Cool. And we have the leaf with this background, which already is, I think, looking good. We're going to copy the background color again, and we're going to add this to the raindrop left, just like that. Cool. Everything is good except one last bit, which is the overlapping part, right? Because this middle circle is supposed to be sitting on top of the circle, right? Because the circle is basically taking over in a sense. One thing we could do is, I think generally, what if we just kind of play around with, so the easy solution here would be just use z-index, and we'll just solve this problem in like one line. So one thing we could do, actually, you can just quickly assign z-indexes. I think that would be probably the easiest solution. I was going to say you could probably maybe also play around with the order of these elements as well. So it looks like the highest priority goes to the circle and the left one. What if I move this one to the last? Then that wouldn't work because this one's taking the highest priority. Okay, what if we move the left, because it looks, this one has the highest priority, and then this one, and then this one. So move the left to the bottom first. Oops, sorry. So let's move the left to the bottom first. So the left one is all the way to the bottom, and then the next part is the middle one, which is this one, and then the top right circle. So there we go. Now everything looks good. Of course, the other solution would have been to assign z-indexes. So this one would have its index of maybe 2. This one would have its index of 1, and this one you can just leave it as is. Cool. Looks like we have got everything covered. All the CSS and HTML is all cleaned up and everything, so should be good. Let's go ahead and submit this. Awesome, we have a 100% match. Great, so that's how you build Acid Rain CSS Battle Target 5. Thanks, guys.